Comanche girl tied to a tree for the beasts, until a rancher saved her with a bullet. Smoke from morning fires curled into the sky as families began their day. Among them was a young girl named Ayana. She was 12, with bright eyes full of curiosity and a spirit that could not be tamed. From the moment she woke, she felt the pull of the open land around her, the wind whispering through the tall grasses and the birds singing their morning songs. Ayana loved the quiet beauty of her village, but she also loved the adventure of exploring beyond its borders. Her father often told her stories about the forest, about the animals that roamed there, and about the dangers that could lurk beyond the safety of the village. She listened carefully, but her curiosity was stronger than her fear. She knew she had to be careful, but the world beyond the village called to her like a song she could not ignore. That morning, after helping her mother with chores, Ayana quietly slipped away, careful not to be seen. She moved with the ease of someone who knew the land well, stepping lightly over the soft earth and around the edges of the fields. She wandered farther than usual, drawn by a cluster of wildflowers she had never seen before. Their colors were bright and unusual, standing out against the greens and browns of the plains. She bent down to touch them, fascinated by their delicate petals and sweet scent. As she explored, she listened to the sounds around her, the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of birds, and the soft whisper of the wind. It felt peaceful, almost magical, and she allowed herself to be carried by the beauty of the moment. But the further she went, the more she realized she had left the familiar paths of the village behind. The trees grew thicker, the shadows longer, and the sounds of the forest deeper. Ayana paused and looked around, trying to remember the way back. The village seemed far away now, hidden behind the wall of trees. She took a deep breath and decided to continue a little farther. There was something calling her, a feeling that she could not explain. Maybe it was adventure, maybe it was curiosity, but whatever it was, it pushed her onward. She didn't notice the faint rustling in the bushes behind her, the subtle shift in the wind that carried a warning she could not hear. She was focused only on the flowers, the trees, and the sense of freedom that came from being in a place untouched by the village's routine. Suddenly, a shadow moved quickly in the corner of her eye. Ayana turned, but there was nothing there. Her heart began to beat faster. She tried to convince herself it was just the forest playing tricks, but a small knot of unease formed in her stomach. She began to move back toward the path she thought she had come from, but the forest seemed different now, more confusing. Every tree looked the same, every shadow seemed to stretch longer than it should. Before she could fully understand what was happening, she felt a strong hand grab her from behind. She struggled and cried out, but the force was too strong. Another pair of hands appeared, and within moments she was overpowered. Ayana's heart raced with fear as she realized she was in serious danger. She screamed as loudly as she could, hoping someone from the village might hear her, but the forest swallowed her voice. Her captors tied her to a sturdy tree, their movements quick and efficient. Ayana's small wrists were bound, the rope biting slightly into her skin. She struggled against it, twisting and pulling, but the knots held firm. She tried to think clearly, to plan an escape, but her fear made her mind spin. The shadows around her grew longer as the sun climbed higher, and the once beautiful forest now felt like a trap closing in. Ayana's thoughts turned to her family. She imagined her mother noticing she was gone, her father frantically searching, and the other villagers calling her name. Tears filled her eyes, but she forced herself to breathe deeply, to stay calm. She remembered the stories her father had told her about courage and strength, about never giving up even in the darkest moments. She clung to those words now, repeating them silently as a shield against despair. The forest around her was alive with sound, the chatter of birds, the rustle of leaves, and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. Every sound made her flinch, every shadow made her heart pound faster. She tried to estimate how long she had been tied there, but time seemed meaningless. Minutes stretched into hours, and the sun began to lower in the sky, casting the forest in an orange glow. Yana's muscles ached, her wrists were sore, and yet she refused to give in to hopelessness. She looked around for anything she could use to free herself, a sharp rock, a stick, anything that might help. But the forest offered no easy escape. She thought about calling for help again, but her voice was hoarse, and she feared it would only attract more danger. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment, focusing on her breathing, trying to calm the storm of fear inside her. She imagined her father's strong hands holding hers, her mother's comforting voice, and she allowed herself a single moment of hope. Night began to approach, and with it, new fears. The forest became darker, the animals more active. Yana knew that she had to stay alert, to keep her senses sharp. She could hear the distant growl of a coyote and the flapping of wings as a bird moved overhead. Every sound reminded her of the danger she was in, but also of the life that still pulsed around her. She realized that survival meant staying aware, staying strong, and never losing hope, no matter how desperate things seemed. Hours passed, and exhaustion began to weigh heavily on her. Her body ached, her hands were raw from struggling, and her mind was weary. Yet even in the darkness, a spark of determination remained. She whispered to herself, promising that she would not give up, that she would find a way to survive. The forest, which had once seemed inviting and beautiful, now felt like a test of her courage, and she refused to fail. As the first stars began to appear in the sky, Ayana's thoughts turned once again to her family. She imagined her little brother waiting for her to return, her parents praying silently for her safety, and the entire village coming together to search for her. That thought gave her strength. She realized that even though she was tied and vulnerable, she was not alone. Her family, her village, and even her own inner courage were with her, and that was enough to keep her going for now. The night settled in fully, and the forest became a world of shadows and whispers. Yana stayed alert, listening carefully to every sound, her mind working tirelessly to find a solution. She knew that dawn might bring help, or it might bring new dangers, but she also knew that giving up was not an option. Her spirit, fierce and determined, would carry her through this night. And so, under the vast, starlit sky, Ayana remained tied to the tree, a young girl facing unimaginable fear, yet refusing to surrender to it, clinging to hope with every ounce of her being. The night grew darker around Ayana, and the forest became a place of whispers, shadows, and strange sounds that made her heart pound. She tried to focus on her breathing, slow and steady, but every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made her flinch. She was tied tightly to the tree, the rope biting into her wrists, and though her body ached, it was her mind that felt the weight of fear the most. She wished she could see her family, could hear her mother's comforting voice or feel her father's reassuring hand. Instead, she was alone, surrounded by an unknown world that seemed suddenly alive with hidden threats. Yana tried to calm herself by thinking about the animals she had learned about in the village. Her father had always told her that understanding the forest could help her survive. Wolves, he said, usually hunted in packs, but they were also cautious of humans. Bears were powerful but avoided confrontation if they sensed danger. Birds could be messengers of change, their cries warning of approaching threats. She tried to listen carefully, trying to distinguish between harmless sounds and those that might signal real danger. Each noise sharpened her senses, making her more alert, though it also heightened her fear. Hours passed slowly. The moon climbed high in the sky, casting silver light across the forest. Shadows danced around her, shifting with the gentle sway of the trees. Yana's thoughts wandered to memories of the village. Her little brother playing with his wooden toy horses, her mother baking bread in the morning, her father telling stories of courage and survival. Those memories gave her strength, reminding her of a world beyond the immediate danger, a world she had to fight to return to. The thought of giving up never crossed her mind. She knew she had to survive, no matter what. The wind shifted, carrying with it unfamiliar scents. Yana sniffed the air carefully, recognizing the smell of wet earth, leaves, and distant smoke from a nearby fire. But there was another smell, one that made her stomach turn: wild animals. She held her breath and listened. Somewhere in the darkness, she could hear low growls and the crunch of heavy footsteps. Wolves, she thought, or perhaps a bear. Her heart raced, and she tried to make herself small to appear less noticeable. Though she was tied, she used her instincts, trying to stay calm while the tension around her built. Minutes felt like hours as she waited, straining her ears and scanning her surroundings with her eyes, though the darkness made it nearly impossible to see clearly. Every shadow seemed to move with a life of its own. She could hear the whisper of the wind through the leaves, the distant calls of nocturnal birds, and the occasional rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Yet there was something larger approaching, something that made her gut tighten with fear. She could feel the presence of life around her, both wild and unknown, and she knew she had to stay alert to survive. Yana tried again to think of a way to free herself. She examined the rope, tugged at it gently, and twisted her hands in different directions. The knots were firm, but she refused to let frustration take over. She remembered her father's words: "When you are in danger, do not panic. Use your mind and your courage together and you can find a way." She clung to those words, testing every possibility. She considered rubbing the rope against the rough bark of the tree, trying to loosen it, but the friction only caused more pain in her wrists. Still, she did not give up. Every small movement, every attempt was a step towards survival. Hours continued to pass and exhaustion began to set in. Yana's muscles ached, her wrists burned, and her back hurt from leaning against the tree. Yet her determination never wavered. She thought of her family, imagining their worry and fear if she did not return. She thought of the village, the people who depended on each other, and the lessons she had learned from her parents and elders. Each thought gave her a spark of energy, a reason to keep going, even when the darkness seemed endless. Suddenly, she heard something that made her freeze, a low, guttural growl from somewhere nearby. Her eyes widened and she tried to control her breathing. The sound grew louder, closer. She realized she was not alone, and the danger was real. Her instincts told her to stay perfectly still, to make herself invisible to the eyes that might be watching. Her body tensed, her heart raced, but she forced herself to remain calm, focusing on every detail around her. She listened to the rhythm of her own heartbeat, counting each one, grounding herself in the moment. The night air grew colder, and a slight mist began to creep across the forest floor. It made the surroundings even harder to see, but it also hid her from view. Yana used the mist to her advantage, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. She continued to tug at the rope whenever she thought no one or nothing was watching. Every small success, every tiny shift felt like a victory. It reminded her that even in fear there was hope. Even in darkness there was a chance to survive. And she clung to that hope with every ounce of her being. Time seemed to lose all meaning. The moon traveled across the sky and the stars blinked softly above, silent witnesses to her struggle. The sounds of the forest were constant companions, leaves rustling, twigs snapping, distant animal calls. Yana learned to distinguish them, to interpret them as signs of movement, of life, and of danger. Each sound taught her something, each shadow reminded her of the stakes. She was alone, but she was learning, adapting, and surviving, and that knowledge gave her strength she had never known she possessed. At one point, a small owl landed on a nearby branch, its eyes reflecting the moonlight. Yana watched it silently, fascinated by the quiet presence of the creature. The owl did not move closer, nor did it seem threatened by her. It reminded her that the forest was not only a place of danger, but also a place of life, a place where creatures moved with purpose and caution. She felt a strange sense of calm, as if the owl's watchful eyes were encouraging her, reminding her to stay vigilant but not to give in to fear entirely. The night continued its slow march, and Ayana's hope remained her anchor. She thought of what she would do if the forest were empty, if no one came to help. She imagined herself finding a way to free her hands, climbing to safety, and running back to her village. The thought of escape filled her with determination. She refused to allow despair to take hold. Every small act of defiance against her bindings, every breath she took in the cold night air, was an act of courage. She refused to be a victim. She would survive. Hours passed, and the first hint of dawn began to touch the horizon. The darkness slowly lifted, revealing the shapes of trees, rocks, and the distant plains. Yana's body was tired, but her mind remained sharp. She had endured the longest hours of her life, had faced the fear of the unknown, and had remained strong. The forest, once a place of terror, now felt like a challenge she had begun to overcome. She realized that survival was not just about strength, but about patience, awareness, and the refusal to give up. As the light of morning grew brighter, she heard a distant sound that made her heart leap, a human voice. It was faint, carried on the wind, but unmistakable. Hope surged through her, stronger than it had been all night. She called out, her voice hoarse but determined. The sound echoed through the forest, reaching ears that might help her. Her struggle was not over, but for the first time in many hours, she believed that she might not face the forest alone. Yana held onto that hope tightly. She knew the next moments would be critical, that she had to stay alert and ready for anything. But she also knew that she had survived the night, that she had endured fear and uncertainty, and that her courage had carried her through. The forest, once a place of terror, had become a proving ground. And she, a young Comanche girl tied to a tree, had proven herself strong, resilient, and ready to face whatever came next. The first light of dawn began to filter through the forest, painting the leaves and ground with soft shades of gold and green. Yana squinted against the growing brightness, her eyes adjusting to shapes and shadows that had been hidden in the night. The long hours she had spent tied to the tree had left her body exhausted, but her mind remained alert. Every sound, every movement around her, was magnified in the quiet morning air. The forest, which had been terrifying in the darkness, now revealed itself in sharper detail. Gnarled branches stretching toward the sky, moss-covered rocks, and hidden pathways that twisted in unexpected directions. Even as the sun rose, Ayana knew danger had not passed. Her ears caught the distant crunching of leaves under heavy feet, the deep growls of predators stirring in the underbrush. Wolves, she thought, or perhaps a bear searching for food. She could feel the ground vibrate faintly with the movement of something large. Her heart began to race again, but she forced herself to stay calm. She remembered the stories her father told her, stories of survival, of people who had faced impossible odds and lived because they kept their minds sharp and their courage alive. She clung to those words like a lifeline. The forest around her was alive in ways that seemed both beautiful and terrifying. Birds called from the trees, their songs mingling with the soft rush of wind through the leaves. Squirrels scurried up trunks, their tiny claws making sharp sounds against the bark. But beneath these normal forest sounds, there was a deeper, more menacing presence. The growls had grown louder closer, and now there were multiple sets of footsteps approaching. Yana's small body trembled with fear, but she refused to let panic take over. She knew she had to think, to prepare for whatever was coming. She tried once more to tug at the rope, to loosen it or find a way to free herself. Her hands were raw, her muscles tired, but the stubborn knot held fast. She rubbed her wrists carefully, trying not to make the bindings tighter. Her mind raced with possibilities. Could she twist the rope against a rock nearby? Could she use a sharp branch to cut it? She had no tools, no help, only her own courage and quick thinking. Every failed attempt was frustrating, but she reminded herself that patience was as important as strength. Survival depended on calmness and careful observation, not reckless struggle. The sounds of the approaching animals grew louder, sending chills down her spine. She could hear the crunch of dry leaves, the snap of twigs, and a low growl that vibrated in the cold morning air. She tried to make herself small, pressing her body against the rough bark of the tree. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape, but the rope made that impossible. She focused instead on the rhythm of her breathing, counting each breath in and out to steady her trembling. She listened carefully to the forest, trying to understand where the danger was coming from and how best to respond. Time stretched in endless minutes, each second heavy with tension. Yana could see shapes moving in the shadows, tall figures that blended with the trees, dark forms that made her stomach twist. Her imagination wanted to make them larger, more terrifying than they might be, but her instincts reminded her that staying alert was the key to survival. She studied every movement, every rustle of leaves, and tried to predict what would happen next. Her mind worked tirelessly, analyzing, planning, and refusing to give in to hopelessness. Then she heard the most frightening sound yet, a low, guttural growl that was closer than before. She held her breath, trying to make herself invisible. The shadow of a wolf, or maybe more than one, moved at the edge of her vision. Her heart pounded violently, and fear threatened to overwhelm her. But deep inside, a stubborn spark of determination refused to die. She reminded herself of her family, her village, and the life she had to return to. She imagined her father's hands guiding her, her mother's gentle voice comforting her, and the thought gave her the strength to stay alert. As the animals drew closer, Yana realized that the time for waiting might be ending. She knew she could not remain passive forever. The forest, which had been her playground in daylight and a mysterious world in the night, now felt like a trap closing in. Every shadow, every sound, reminded her that her survival depended on sharp senses and quick thinking. She moved subtly against the tree, shifting her weight to see if she could find any weakness in the ropes, any opportunity for escape. Every movement was careful, deliberate, and calculated to avoid attracting attention from the approaching danger. Hours of fear and tension had honed her instincts. Yana noticed details that others might have missed. The faint rustle of grass a few feet away, the smell of wet fur, the sound of heavy paws pressing against the earth. She realized that she could predict the approach of the animals if she remained completely still and focused. Her mind sharpened, filtering out distractions and focusing only on what mattered. She felt a strange combination of fear and empowerment. Fear because of the immediate threat, empowerment because she had survived so long and had not given in to despair. The forest began to grow brighter as the sun rose higher. Light streamed through the canopy, creating patches of gold and green on the forest floor. Yana could now see more clearly the shapes and movements of the trees, rocks, and underbrush. The animals, too, became more visible. A group of wolves had circled closer, their eyes glinting in the morning light. Yana felt a surge of adrenaline. She knew she had to remain still, but her mind raced, trying to imagine what she would do if they came closer. Every lesson her father had taught her about the forest, about animals, about survival, came rushing back. Suddenly, there was a sound that was different from the growls or rustling leaves, a human voice, distant but clear. Yana froze, her heart leaping with hope. She listened carefully, straining to understand if it was real or a trick of her tired mind. The voice came again, this time closer, accompanied by the sound of hooves on the forest floor. Yana's eyes widened. Could it be someone coming to help? Could it be a chance at rescue? She tried to call out, but her voice was weak, hoarse from shouting during the night. She whispered instead, small sounds carried on the wind, hoping the stranger could hear her. The animals, startled by the new presence, hesitated. Their growls faltered and they moved back slightly, unsure of the intruder. Iana's heart pounded in relief, but she knew the danger was not gone. The forest was still alive with movement, still unpredictable, and she had to remain alert. She pressed herself closer against the tree, every sense strained toward the sounds of the approaching human. She saw shadows moving between the trees, shapes that seemed larger and more purposeful than the wild creatures. Her hope surged again, stronger and more certain. Through the growing light, Iana could finally make out the figure of a man riding a horse, moving carefully but quickly through the forest. He carried a rifle, and his eyes scanned the area with alert focus. He slowed as he neared her location, clearly seeing her tied to the tree. Iana's heart leapt with a mixture of relief and fear. Could he reach her in time? Could he save her before the animals returned? She remained still, letting the human presence grow closer while the wolves lingered at a cautious distance. The man dismounted quickly, his movements precise and confident. He moved toward Iana, his eyes scanning the forest floor for any remaining threat. The wolves, sensing the authority and danger of the stranger, retreated into the shadows, leaving the immediate area quiet once more. Iana felt a mix of awe and gratitude. She had survived the long night, faced the terror of the forest, and now, at last, help had arrived. Her fear remained, but it was joined by hope, a hope that this man could undo the nightmare she had endured. As he reached the tree, the man spoke softly, asking if she was all right. His calm voice contrasted with the chaos of the night, and Iana felt a wave of relief wash over her. He carefully untied the knots that had held her captive, his hands steady and reassuring. Every movement was measured, deliberate, and precise, a demonstration of skill and care. As the last knot fell away, Iana rubbed her sore wrists, her muscles trembling but her spirit lifted. She had survived the night, faced the beasts, and now was being rescued by a brave stranger. The forest, once a place of terror, now seemed almost peaceful in the morning light. Birds sang, leaves rustled gently, and the distant sun bathed the trees in warm colors. Iana took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past hours begin to lift. She knew the danger was not completely gone. There could be more wild animals nearby, but she also knew she was no longer alone. The presence of the rancher had changed everything. The forest, which had tested her courage, had also revealed her strength, her resilience, and her ability to survive even in the darkest hours. The sun had fully risen, casting warm light across the forest floor, but Iana still trembled from the night she had endured. Her small hands rubbed at the raw spots on her wrists, the memory of the tight rope and the fear it had brought still fresh in her mind. She felt every muscle ache from hours of being tied to the tree, yet she also felt an unfamiliar sense of relief. The fear that had been constant for so long was beginning to lift, replaced by the sudden presence of a man who had come to save her. The rancher, whose name she would later learn was Thomas, moved carefully, yet with urgency. He had spotted her while patrolling the outskirts of the forest, keeping an eye out for dangers to the nearby villages and livestock. When he saw the young girl tied to a tree, his instincts told him that time was critical. His horse had brought him swiftly, but the final steps to reach her required caution. He knew the forest was full of surprises, that wild animals might still lurk nearby, and that any wrong move could endanger them both. Thomas approached slowly, calling softly to let Iana know he was there. She flinched at first, unsure if this new presence was friend or foe, but the sound of his voice was calm, steady, and kind. It reassured her in a way that few things had in the past hours. She watched as he carefully scanned the surroundings, rifle held but not aimed at her, demonstrating a level of control and professionalism that made her trust him instantly. Every step he took seemed to push away the shadows that had haunted her all night. He knelt beside her, examining the rope that held her. "You're safe now," he said gently, his voice a balm to her frayed nerves. Gianna wanted to believe him, but she remained alert, knowing that nothing in the forest could be trusted entirely. Thomas's hands worked quickly yet carefully, undoing the tight knots that had bound her wrists. Each knot released was like a small victory, a step closer to freedom. She could feel the blood return to her hands, the circulation she had missed during the long hours of restraint, and with it came a sense of hope she hadn't felt since being tied to the tree. The distant sounds of the forest still reminded her of the dangers she had faced. Wolves lingered at the edge of her vision, their eyes watching but cautious, their instinct telling them to avoid humans. The memory of their growls and the feel of their presence made her shiver. Thomas was aware of them too, keeping one hand on his rifle and one eye on the surroundings, ready to protect her if necessary. The tension in the forest remained, but the immediate threat of attack had been softened by the arrival of a human protector who understood the ways of the wild. Finally free from the rope, Ayana rubbed her wrists and flexed her hands, marveling at the ability to move freely again. She looked at Thomas with wide eyes, gratitude and awe mingling with the exhaustion and fear still coursing through her body. He offered her water from a small canteen and a reassuring smile. She drank slowly, savoring each sip as if it were the sweetest thing in the world. It was not just water. It was a reminder of life continuing, of kindness in the midst of fear, of hope after darkness. Thomas explained that he had been riding near the village when he noticed her, and that he had followed the trail carefully, knowing she was in danger. He described how he had moved with caution, ensuring that no sudden movement would alert the predators still in the area. His knowledge of the forest, the animals, and survival had made this rescue possible. Gianna listened intently, understanding now that her survival had been aided not only by her own courage, but also by the bravery and skill of another person who had risked his safety for hers. The wolves, sensing the man's strength and the presence of danger, slowly retreated into the deeper parts of the forest. Their eyes lingered for a moment, curious and cautious, before disappearing entirely among the trees. Gianna realized that she was truly safe now, that the immediate threat had passed. Her body, though tired and aching, felt a lighter weight, as if the burden of the night had been lifted. She took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh morning air, and felt a strange but comforting connection to the forest around her. Though it had been a place of fear, it was also a place of life, resilience, and lessons that would stay with her forever. Thomas helped her onto his horse, ensuring she was steady and secure. Gianna felt a mixture of nervousness and trust as she held on to him for balance. The horse moved slowly at first, then picked up speed along the forest path that led toward safety. With each step, she felt herself moving away from the terror of the past night and toward the warmth and familiarity of her village. She kept her eyes on the forest behind her, knowing that the dangers were real but now distant. The feeling of being rescued was both exhilarating and humbling. As they approached the edge of the forest, the sounds of the village reached their ears, distant voices calling, the clatter of morning chores, and the occasional cry of a child. Gianna's heart leapt. The familiar sounds of home, once taken for granted, now seemed miraculous. She realized how much she had missed them in the darkness and how much courage it had taken to survive until this moment. Her trust in Thomas, the rancher who had saved her, was absolute. Without his bravery, she knew that her story might have ended very differently. Upon reaching the village, Thomas guided her carefully through the streets, keeping an eye out for anyone who might pose a threat. Villagers noticed the pair immediately, drawn by the sight of the girl emerging from the forest on horseback. Their faces shifted from curiosity to shock, then to relief, as they realized she had survived the night. Mothers held their children close, fathers wiped their brows, and everyone gathered to greet her. The reunion was emotional but quiet, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and wonder at her survival. Gianna dismounted with Thomas's help and ran toward her parents. Her mother enveloped her in a tight embrace, tears streaming down her face, while her father held her close, whispering words of reassurance and relief. Her little brother clung to her side, not fully understanding the danger she had faced, but knowing that she was safe and home. The villagers offered smiles, kind words, and help, demonstrating the deep sense of community that had always been a part of her life. For the first time since being tied to the tree, Ayanna felt completely safe. Thomas stood slightly apart, allowing the family to reunite, but the villagers noticed him and approached with gratitude. They listened as he explained what had happened, how he had discovered her tied to the tree, and how he had driven the wild animals away. Every detail he shared deepened their admiration and respect. He had not acted recklessly. He had assessed the situation carefully, taken decisive action, and saved a life. His courage, skill, and compassion were clear to everyone present, and Ayanna felt a deep sense of gratitude that would stay with her forever. Later, the village held a small gathering to honor Thomas's bravery. Ayanna sat quietly, still processing the events of the past night. She reflected on her own courage, on the fear she had felt, and on the determination that had kept her alive. But she also understood something new. Bravery sometimes came from others, from people willing to risk themselves for the sake of another. Thomas had shown her the meaning of selfless courage, and she would carry that lesson for the rest of her life. Even as the sun climbed higher and the day warmed the village, Ayanna's mind replayed the night's events. The forest, the shadows, the sounds of predators, and the tight rope around her wrists, every detail was vivid, yet tempered by the relief of her rescue. She knew that she had survived because of her own strength, but also because the world still had people who cared, who acted when needed, and who brought hope when all seemed lost. That combination of personal courage and the kindness of strangers had saved her life. As the day continued, Ayanna rested with her family, recovering from the night of terror. She felt a new respect for the world around her, for the forest that had been both a place of fear and a place of learning. She thought of Thomas and the courage it took to face the unknown, to move with purpose when others might hesitate. She realized that bravery came in many forms, in survival, in protection, and in the willingness to help others without hesitation. And she understood that her own story, which had begun with fear, was now one of hope, resilience, and life renewed. The sun had fully risen, filling the village with warm, golden light, yet Ayanna remained quiet, sitting near her home and reflecting on the events of the past day. The night she had spent tied to the tree, facing darkness, fear, and the threat of wild animals, was still vivid in her mind. Every sound of the forest, every shadow of the night seemed to linger in her memory. Yet now, with the safety of her village and the comfort of her family surrounding her, she felt a mixture of relief, gratitude, and a new understanding of life. Her mother sat beside her, brushing Ayanna's hair gently, speaking softly to ease her lingering fears. Her father stood nearby, keeping a careful eye on her, his presence a constant source of reassurance. Even her little brother played quietly nearby, glancing at her occasionally, sensing that something important had happened but not fully understanding it. Ayanna watched the daily life of the village unfold around her, the clatter of pots, the laughter of children, the songs of the women working together, and felt a deep sense of belonging and safety. The village was more than just a home. It was a community that had cared for her, that had prepared her to survive, and that had now welcomed her back with open arms. In the quiet moments, Ayanna thought of Thomas, the rancher who had saved her. She remembered his calm, steady voice, the careful way he had untied her, and the courage it must have taken to confront the dangers of the forest. His bravery had been a lifeline, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there were people willing to act selflessly for the sake of another. She realized that courage was not just about fighting beasts or facing immediate danger. It was also about compassion, awareness, and the willingness to step forward when others might hesitate. Yana's thoughts turned inward as she considered her own journey. The night she had endured had tested her in ways she had never imagined. She had felt fear that made her want to run and cry, but she had also discovered strength she did not know she possessed. Her mind had remained alert, her instincts sharp, and her courage had grown with each passing hour. She understood now that survival was as much about mental resilience as it was about physical endurance. The forest had been a teacher, harsh and demanding, but its lessons were now etched into her memory. The villagers gathered around her, expressing their relief and admiration. They praised her bravery, not for facing danger alone, but for enduring a terrifying ordeal without losing hope. Their words were kind and heartfelt, and Ayana felt a swelling sense of pride, not in herself alone, but in the community that had shaped her. She realized that her strength was intertwined with the love and support of her family and her village. Courage, she understood, was never entirely solitary. It was nurtured by the people who care, by those who guide and protect, and by the lessons learned from those who come before. As the day continued, Ayana helped her mother with simple tasks, her hands still sensitive but her spirit lifted. She moved carefully, mindful of her sore muscles and tired wrists, but with a newfound energy. Every motion, every small act of normal life felt like a victory. She appreciated the ability to walk freely, to reach for objects, and to move without restriction. These simple freedoms, once taken for granted, now felt precious and extraordinary. The morning that had begun with fear and uncertainty had transformed into a day of safety, love, and the reassurance that life could continue, even after near disaster. Yana also spent time speaking quietly with her father, recounting the night's events in detail. She told him about the growls, the shadows, the fear that had pressed against her chest, and the moments when she had thought all hope was lost. Her father listened carefully, never interrupting, his expression a mix of concern and pride. When she finished, he spoke of her courage, of how her quick thinking and determination had kept her alive. He emphasized that her ability to stay calm under pressure was as important as any act of bravery. The conversation helped Ayana process her experience, turning fear into understanding and pain into lessons that would guide her in the future. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Ayana felt a sense of renewal. She stepped outside, breathing in the fresh air and feeling the warmth of the sunlight on her face. The world, once full of threats and uncertainty, now seemed vibrant and alive. Birds sang, trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the distant sounds of the village reminded her of the safety and comfort she had returned to. She walked slowly, savoring each step, aware of her surroundings and grateful for the life that had been preserved through courage, quick thinking, and the help of another. Her mind returned once more to Thomas. Though he had left after ensuring she was safely back with her family, she could not forget him. She thought of the bravery required to ride into a forest full of unknown dangers, of the quick decisions made under pressure, and of the calm presence that had given her hope. She understood now that heroes often appeared quietly, acting without expectation of reward, driven only by the knowledge that someone's life depended on their actions. Thomas had shown her that true courage and kindness were inseparable, and she vowed to remember his example always. Ayana also began to reflect on the lessons the forest had taught her. She thought about the importance of paying attention to details, listening carefully, and trusting her instincts. She understood that fear could be a tool if managed correctly, a signal that helped her stay alert and prepared. She thought about patience, about the power of waiting, observing, and acting when the moment was right. Each lesson, though born from fear and danger, became a treasure she could carry into the future. The forest, which had seemed so threatening, had become a teacher, and she had been a careful student. The villagers celebrated her return with quiet joy, offering small gifts of food, water, and words of comfort. Children gathered around to hear her story, wide-eyed and eager, though she chose her words carefully to avoid frightening them. She spoke of bravery, hope, and the importance of staying calm, emphasizing what she had learned about courage, survival, and the kindness of strangers. Her words inspired the younger children, while the adults nodded, understanding the depth of her experience. Yana realized that her ordeal, though terrifying, could become a story of hope and learning for others. As evening approached, Yana sat with her family once more, looking out at the horizon where the forest met the plains. The sky was painted in shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the gentle sounds of the village settling into night filled the air. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the world, while dangerous at times, was also full of care, courage, and life. Her family's love, the village's support, and the bravery of Thomas had combined to ensure that she survived. She had faced darkness and danger, and now she could look forward to the days ahead with hope and determination. Iyana's heart was full of gratitude. She understood that life was fragile, yet resilient. She had learned that courage could come from within, from those who loved her, and from unexpected strangers willing to act when needed. She also understood that fear, while powerful, could be managed, transformed into focus, and used to guide actions that preserved life. Each lesson added to her strength, building a foundation of wisdom, awareness, and compassion that would remain with her forever. The stars began to appear in the evening sky, twinkling faintly above the village. Iyana stood quietly, thinking about the journey she had endured, the dangers she had faced, and the rescue that had saved her life. She felt a mixture of humility, gratitude, and a quiet pride. She realized that survival was not just about escaping danger. It was about learning, growing, and understanding the value of courage, community, and hope. The night she had spent tied to the tree would remain with her, but it would no longer define her as a moment of fear. Instead, it was now a story of resilience, bravery, and the kindness of others that had brought her safely home. Jana returned to her home, joining her family for a quiet evening meal. Laughter, conversation, and the simple comfort of being together filled the room. She felt stronger than she had before, not just physically but in spirit. The forest had tested her, danger had challenged her, and she had survived. She understood now that life was a combination of courage, preparation, resilience, and the support of others. Each of these elements had been present in her story, and together they had ensured her survival. As the day ended and the village grew quiet under the gentle glow of the moon, Ayana lay down to sleep. She thought of the forest, of Thomas, of her family, and of the lessons she had learned. Fear had taught her strength, danger had taught her awareness, and hope had guided her through the darkest hours. She felt at peace, knowing that she was alive, loved, and ready for whatever the future might bring. And with that thought, she drifted into a calm sleep, the memory of the night's terror slowly fading, replaced by the certainty that courage, kindness, and hope would always light the way.